So that's a slightly political backdrop, I would
I could
say.
take it off.
No, no,
I'll
it's
take
fine.
it off.
It's fine. It's cute. All right. So this is good timing. That's very
Um,
neutral.
yeah.
Good morning, everybody. So this is the big buzz is Biden wins 20 minutes ago, the presidential election. So I normally try not to talk politics, but I thought there's a few things we can talk. The intersection of empathy and politics. I thought we'll get into that a little bit this morning, because there's a lot in there, right? It's been such a challenging year, challenging 4 years, challenging, I don't know, 40 years, depending on how old you are, right? There's a lot of challenges in the world. Um, and a lot of them do intersect with politics. And so we'll get into that a little bit. Why don't we take a bit of time just at the outset to breathe and just sort of settle our minds into the morning. We can breathe and reflect at the same time. It's not that we have to tear our mind in two different directions or fight what's on our mind, but we can settle into what's in our mind with a bit of breathing meditation. So as usual, we just find a comfortable position, maybe stretch your shoulders, your neck, if a little bit, if that gets tense, whatever helps you to feel a bit of opening up, right? We carry our emotional experience in our body. We carry our tension in our body. Our body is a holistic organ that is reacting in lots of levels to what's going on in our mind. So let our body become comfortable and just take a deep breath in and out. And again, we don't need to fight what's on our mind, but we can just settle into what's on our mind. So taking another breath, we just relax, just allow ourselves to relax into our current state. And then we can just ask ourselves, what is important right now? And that's your question. That's your answer. What is important right now? There may be a lot of things on our mind, but it's helpful for us to reflect that all of that is on our mind right now. It's our mind in this present moment that is thinking our experience in this present moment that we're having. We tend to think that we are in time, we're moving through time, but in a sense, time is within our present experience. We're imagining the future, remembering the past, and all of that is happening right now in the present moment. And as we relax a little bit, there may be some slight change in our feeling state, some warmth or tingling, some sense of comfort in our body, and we can just focus on that for a bit. And even though we're just spending a short time here together, our time here changes our mind, changes our experience, takes our life in a slightly different direction than it would have gone. So we can ask, what is our intention? What would we like to take out of this time? Best case, what could we draw from this time here today? And then we can carry that intention into the class as we arise from our meditation. Okay. So what I've been focusing on for the last few classes is this topic of empathy, and as you know, I've got a little bit of a focus on the workplace and the IT world and so forth. So I'm particularly interested in empathy in the workplace, and I was telling. I was telling Eileen before we started the class that when I was 20 years ago, when I was just starting to teach meditation, my first couple of years, I was very, very dutiful. Like I was very duty oriented, like just trying to be a good monk and teach things, do things right, not do extraneous stuff. And I went as usual to teach my Thursday night meditation class. And determined that I was just going to stick to my topic, the topic that was scheduled for that class. Now, that particular Thursday was September 11th, 2001. And that morning, the whole world had been, awakened to this the terrorist attack, and it was on everybody's mind, top of mind. But I just tried to sort of push through with this class topic as scheduled, not being really sensitive to what people were focusing on at that time. And the class was not really it was a terrible class. It was probably one of the worst classes that I'd given, because it was just so out of step with where people were. And so I'm not going to do that again today. We're going to talk a little bit about politics, just because that's on everybody's mind a little bit. But there's one lesson for me from that, which is that there's this difference. There's this a bit of a tension between empathy and sensitivity to what's going on, and duty and discipline. And there, I remember a couple months ago, there was a scientific or a psychology study that came out that said that when people are following orders, they are less empathetic than they would be otherwise. And it's a bit of an interesting, it's kind of a switch that we flip in our mind. So are we following orders, or are we listening with empathy and attuned to empathy? And interestingly, both of those are similar, because both of those are about getting social information, right? Duty is about social information from people who have more power than us or who we admire or respect. And empathy is getting social information from the people who we're actually, in immediate contact with. And so they're similar in a sense, like a sense of duty and obligation, doing what you're supposed to do, being a good person, whatever that means, and being empathetic, like being sensitive to the people that you're around at that time. But there's a bit of a trade-off, right? If you're very duty oriented, like these like these scientific, like the study done. It was, I think it was in the 60s, it was a long time ago, probably wouldn't pass modern ethical tests, right? Where people pressed this button and delivered an electric shock to people if these men in white lab coats said, no, just, it's fine, don't just do it, just administer these shocks, right? So when people are driven by duty, like doing what you're supposed to do, you can kind of turn off the empathy thing. And that can lead to disastrous situations, of course, where we're just trampling over other people with cruelty because we feel like we're doing what we're supposed to do. At the same time, you can go to extremes with empathy, right? Like you can be so empathetic that you can't make, decisions that may be tough decisions, like if your kids are just crying and begging, I don't want to go to school and I don't want to do this and so forth. And you at some point you need to kind of push through, like the immediate pain that people are experiencing may not be the most important thing to listen to. You may need a longer term point of view. From a long-term point of view, I know this is uncomfortable. I know none of us like this, but we're going to push through. And having that sense of duty, and there is a time and place for both of those. But that's where we need our wisdom. We need wisdom, but we also need flexibility. We need a wide emotional range, right? So we can be good, dutiful people, but we can also be very empathetic, very sensitive people. And so what's been the biggest relief for me over the last 7 years, sort of getting back into the working world, is how much empathy is discussed in the working world these days, or at least in certain corners of it. Because I feel like when I entered the job force, I fully expected it to be like cold and impersonal, or just driven by anger and fear and these kinds of things. But in fact, there's a huge emphasis on empathy in the working world. And so that's really what, in many organizations, appreciating that for us to be effective working together, there needs to be an attunement. We need to be attuned to what others are feeling, what others are experiencing, which is basically what empathy is, that ability to become attuned to what others are experiencing. So that empathy is, in fact, it is taking in a type of information, right? And so if you just even think from a cold, information-oriented, business-oriented world, what are we doing, right? We're learning, we're taking in information, and we're trying to understand what's going on and trying to make reasonable decisions. So empathy is a way of gathering information from somebody else, like looking at their facial expressions, looking at the tone of voice, the writing style, body language, whatever it is, or inferring what they might be experiencing, taking in whatever kinds of signals and cues we might be able to take in to try to get some sense about where this person is. And of course, we naturally use our own internal experience to anchor ourselves in, to navigate other people's worlds. And, and especially I think even children have a pretty wide range of emotional experiences, fear, pain, happiness, joy, etc. But as we grow older, maybe it can go in two different directions, but I think, we gather a pretty broad range of experiences. We've all been there, right? At a certain point, we've been in every kind of situation, arrogance and joy and disappointment, and we kind of, and so that can help us to broaden our emotional range and broaden our empathy as well, as long as we're not shutting that empathy down. So in terms of politics, it's one of the things that is most universal. There are some biases that certain groups are more susceptible to than others, right? But there's a bias that everybody is susceptible to, which is in-group, out-group bias. The sense of, who is in my in-group versus who's in my out, who's not in my group. And we tend to have very strong empathy for people who are in our in-group and not so much for people who are in our out-group, or who are not in the in-group. And so our empathy, we can literally shut our empathy off, or it's suppressed if we're dealing with somebody who's not in our in-group. And that, of course, is very problematic. And one of the things that I like about the working world is it kind of forces you to spend time with people who have different political persuasions than you, or different religious persuasions than you. Depends on your job, of course, but you can't choose your coworkers to some degree. Like, you kind of choose your friends, and your family may tend to fall a little bit close together. But sometimes work can force you to collaborate with people who have very, very different points of view. And that's very, very important from just from an empathy point of view and from a humanity point of view, just connecting with people at a different level compared to just our political orientation, really appreciating that we're all people. We're all people, and we basically go through the same kinds of things. There's a theme that's been running through, if we think about this distinction between conservative versus liberal. So my technical background is in what's called DevOps, where you have some people who are developing, changing, building new things, and some people who are operations people who are maintaining existing things. And there's a tension there because the developers are creating new stuff, change. And the operations people focus on stability. And you've got to get them to work together. There's a natural tension between change and stability. But it's actually the same as a distinction between liberal versus conservative. So liberal, open, allowing, permitting, not worrying. There's some uncertainty. We accept the uncertainty. Diversity, we accept the diversity. Conservative, it's like cautious, not so sure. Be careful. Don't want to change too quick. We liked it the way it was, and so, in a sense, it's a bit of a fundamental distinction. There's been there was a book that came out called The Republican Brain. I haven't read it. I think it generally got good reviews. I think some Republicans maybe not as enthusiastic about it. But I looked. There was an article on Business Insider I looked at last night with like 15 different psychological studies that did all seem to indicate that there were significant differences in terms of the thinking patterns and the emotional patterns in terms of Democrats versus Republicans, say, liberal versus conservative. The main theme that came up in all of that is some underlying orientation towards, is the world generally a slightly dangerous place, slightly bad, slightly dangerous place, in which case the appropriate response would be fear and competition between one another, versus, is the world a comfortable place? Is it very relaxed? There's ample resources and so forth, and so that allows for a more permissive point of view. Why worry? Let's cooperate and so forth. So my neighbor is a traveling salesman. He just got a new job selling windows, and so he drives around and selling window replacements for people who have bad windows. And so he drives out, and it's a tough job. He's just started this job. It's a lot of driving, it's a lot of hard work. He's trying to be successful in that job. And I was reflecting on his experience, because it's hard, right? Trying to make a living if there's a bunch of salespeople competing with each other and there's not enough business and so forth. It's natural that there would be a competitive mindset that would arise. And salespeople, often there is some competitive mindset. I want to get more sales than you do, and because you're just trying to survive. And so in an environment where you're just trying to survive, and there's not many resources, and there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of uncertainty, then you might, then that changes your fundamental outlook. You're more oriented towards competition than cooperation. You might be willing to make ethical sacrifices, do things that are just out of necessity to survive yourself and so forth. But I contrast that, like, I've had a very comfortable life generally. My parents were, we never missed a meal due to not having enough money. I did fine in school, and generally my life's been very comfortable, and I grew up in American society that was pretty comfortable, abundance and wealth and so forth. And so I've got this general mindset that's like, oh, let's just cooperate. Why can't we just all, no problem, just allow anything, we'll all cooperate, everything's fine and so forth. But how much of that is just coming from my instinctive sense that there's abundance, that there's no risk, there's not much fear, there's plenty of resources. So if you have this fundamental internal bias towards the world has ample resources, or the world, is danger and competitiveness, it'll affect everything in your life. It's naturally kind of polarizing. And so that's why they say that Republicans tend to be a bit more driven by fear, exclusionary mindset, hierarchy, really liking, strict, hierarchical structures. And whereas liberals more comfortable with uncertainty, comfortable with, open towards, focused on cooperation, socialism, if you want, versus capitalism, competition. So I find it really helpful to reflect on that underlying difference and appreciate that, just from an evolutionary point of view, humans have evolved and creatures have evolved to need to both compete and to cooperate. So when Darwin wrote his, Origin of Species, he was kind of very focused on competition, right? Survival of the fittest. And a lot of that reflected Victorian society of his day, right? Where everybody's just trying to survive and get by, and, factory workers and very strict hierarchy and so forth. But there's a lot of research evolutionarily about how important cooperation is, right? So cooperation and competition both are critically important. And we're increasingly in a world where we are interdependent on one another within one city, within one company, within one country, across the world. There's increasing interdependence, interrelationship, and there are more and more existential threats to humanity, for example, and existential challenges that do desperately require a mindset of cooperation. So I find it helpful to have empathy for people who have different fundamental disposition to the way I think, and just appreciate that everybody's mindset makes sense to them. For whatever various historical reasons, that just seems like a good idea to them. Now, that's the current state of things. So we live in a very divided country, right? Just politically, right? Very polarized, right? But we're fundamentally one people, one group with common needs and so forth. And so empathy feels, in my mind, more important than ever to bridge those gaps and to take opportunities, at our workplace or wherever we're interacting with people from different points of view, to appreciate that people's mindsets develop for a reason. And if we want to change them, for example, or influence them, we can't be threatening to them. We can't, people don't change when they're under threat. I think that's one of the main challenges. So being open to people and recognizing that everything is a learning journey, even learning the power of cooperation versus competition. All of these things are learning journeys. People's mindsets can and do change over time if they meet conditions that help them to learn and change. So that was all I wanted to share. We can take a bit of time tonight, I thought, in meditation, to just try to empathize with people, around the world, or around the country in particular. But any questions or thoughts on that before we go into the meditation? Eileen, sorry.
Have you read Caste by Isabel Wilkerson?
Mm-hmm.
because she talks about what you're saying about empathizing with people who do not have the privilege as how she understood growing up Black in this country was to her, which was an embedded systemic caste system, much like they would have had in India or still have in India, where you don't break out of that. And bridging the gaps is probably a lot, that's too simplistic a way to approach resolving those problems. But it's insightful, and I just thought they'd throw that out there because it's really important message.
Thanks so much. Okay, cast with an E at the end, it sounds
Yeah.
like. Yeah, cast. Okay. Thanks so much. All right. So I thought what we could do is just spend a bit of time just recognizing our own tendency towards fear, our own inclination to compete, and our own inclination to cooperate, and just appreciate that these seeds of these minds are very present in each of us, right? And then it's just a matter of the situation. Are we more oriented towards competition in one situation? Are we more oriented towards cooperation? Are we more oriented towards fear? Are we more oriented towards abundance? And just recognize that the seeds of these minds are present right now in all of us. And by recognizing what's going on inside our own mind, it'll be easier for us to empathize with others. So what we can do is, again, just settle in for a few minutes of meditation. Taking again a deep breath in and out. Just allowing ourselves to relax with our breath, allowing ourselves to settle in and relax. And we can bring to mind where in our experience is there or has there been fear and a tendency to compete. So when we see our own fear, think about our own fear or competitiveness, instead of just thinking of it as ours, we just think about this as a universal characteristic. This is present in all humans, all animals. We can imagine if that fear and competitiveness was the main, strongest driving force in our mind, how would our life be different? How would we think about other people? How would we think about other companies, other countries, other groups? And we can ask ourselves, where do we actually feel fear and competitiveness now? Where are we actually isolating ourselves from others? Who is our other group? Who are the outsiders in our mind? And where is our own sense of fear and competitiveness and exclusion coming out. And if we prefer to live in a fortunate, comfortable situation where we can share, cooperate, be open, can we imagine a world where more people had that opportunity to be comfortable, cooperative, free, safe? And then we can, for the last minute or so, just think through the short time we've been here, through our actions of contemplating, meditating, listening. How could beneficial results arise from this time? What possible good effects could cascade out of this time that we've had together? And just focus on that for a minute. And then we can relax our concentration and open our eyes.